Hi, all. Welcome to another episode of the GMologist Presents. It's funny, I'm starting to lose track of which episode numbers these are, so hopefully I get this right. Now I understand why sometimes in a series or in the back catalog numbers aren't the way they should or don't line up the way they should. You just lose track. That's just what happens. So in this particular episode, a lot of Jason Connerly, he responds to the question I posed about railroading. How far do you push characters in a long series? So I'll probably have those contiguous and then respond. I also have a recap. I think one recap, maybe two recaps. I will have we did another character creation session in the Dungeon Musings, and this is going to be a short recap of that. And then I ran my Iron Kingdoms 5e game. And I do want to talk about prepping for my birthday game, which I've decided to run Twilight 2000 4th edition by Free League Publishing, and what I'm thinking about, how I'm thinking about it, maybe share a bit of my nervousness like I am right now about running it, since it looks like I may have an all-star crew who's going to be playing in it. So I want to make it fun and memorable, and it's a new rule set, so trying to teach the rule set as well. So I'll get into that more later on, but welcome to the GMologist Presents. High noon, oh, I sell my soul for water. 9 years I've been breaking my back. There's no sun in the shadow of the wizard. See how he flies, he is lighter than air.
Hey Carl, Jason here. Just listening to your latest episode. Your voice isn't that scratchy. It's fine. I'm glad you're able to salvage the box out of the water. That really stinks. You know, a lot of times they'll put those little, plastic baggies over the boxes, but if they leave them in puddles, that doesn't help very much. And it's okay that Amy wasn't able to, do this episode. We'll watch for future episodes that she's doing. Huh. I didn't realize that. When did that Trolloid's Metamorphosis Alpha come out? Because I thought Goodman Games had done it, and I thought they had the current. They were doing the current stuff. They just did the Epsilon City not too long ago, right? Last year, the Kickstarter are both companies. Does Jim Ward have two companies doing Metamorphosis Alpha? Is there Troll Lords and Goodman Games? That's interesting. I didn't realize that there were multiple editions out there at once. I know with some other systems, like with Traveler and some other things, but it's unusual for a single game to be, published by different companies at once. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that. I've never actually played any of the Castle Crusades games, or anything with the Siege engine. So it's something I'll have to fix one of these days.
Yeah, Jason, you would think that they would do the courtesy to put it in a bag or put some plastic underneath it, but it didn't. So, fortunately, like the book is fine. There is enough packing material to absorb the water. It's not going to fall apart due to moisture, which is great. And then to answer your other question about it, yes, there are two versions of Metamorphosis Alpha. There's a reprint or a Kickstarter for the reprint of the original, which I don't know if I did or somehow. I know I have the PDF of that. I don't know if I did the full copy because it was a weird size. But then they convinced the author or Trollord and I think that was by Goodman Games since they do all these reprints. And then they convinced the author to redo it for Castles and Crusades, or I feel like it's more or less agnostic, or you could use any old rule set from D&D or Castles and Crusades. So it works out pretty well. It'd be fun to do it. Would it work as a long-term campaign? I think it could. I think if you did what Larry Hamilton did for his con games and just put them there on the ship, it could work that way as a long-term campaign. I don't know how it would work the other way or another way of doing it, which is the way that they suggest in the product, is that your your vessel comes across this old colony ship, and I wonder, I feel like there's a movie or something where that happens, or maybe a set of books where that happens. Basically, right? The or maybe it was just something that I saw as a blurb or an adventure seed in one of the many space games that I have. Maybe Mindjammer, for example, that all these seed ships were sent out into the void at some point in the human history, and then when technology caught up and they hadn't heard from some ships, there were expeditions out to find them. That might be another way to run a game this way. So your PCs, instead of being, kind of like stuck on the ship or starting on the ship with nothing, get to the ship as salvagers. I don't know. What would be your preference?
As far as your questions go, I'm going to answer in reverse order. Being a player, I don't mind being captured. I don't mind having my stuff taken away. It's all part of the game. It's, it's the unfolding narrative. Hopefully, it's an unfolding narrative. We'll come to that later. But yeah, it's not a big deal. It's part. I mean, it's not. It's a game, and you got to roll with it. And part of the game is having unexpected things happen and dealing with it and problem solving. And if your stuff's taken, you're put in jail. Well, now you have a problem to solve. It's part of the game. It's I don't understand why people get possessive over that stuff. Although people also get angry when the characters get killed. I don't necessarily understand that either. Um, as long as it's not a cheap, obvious shot, as long as you're not executing characters, it's, who cares? I think the attachment people get to characters and the attachment they get to their character stuff and how wound up they get into the character as opposed to just, enjoying the game, enjoying the group, enjoying the dynamic is a potential negative part of the hobby. Um, I know I'm not being very articulate here. I've only had one cup of coffee, but yeah, I mean, if provided you're not GM, you're not just straight up, when the player does something you don't like, you just have a stranger walk up and shoot them in the back of the head. As long as stuff like that's not happening, it's part of the game, man. Roll with it, enjoy it. It's not a big deal. Don't don't get so emotionally attached to all this stuff, unless your GM's railroading. But we'll come to that here next. I'm kidding. As far as the railroad thing, honestly, if somebody's running a scenario out of a book, they're a pre-made module, or they have a story they want to tell. I kind of agree with Eric Tenkar and Joe Lawyer. The RPGs are not the medium to tell stories. If you have a story you want to tell, then write a novel. Don't force other people into where you're railroading them and they can't make decisions and they have to go the way the story has to unfold the way you want it to. Now, you can set out something. I think that's okay. But at the point that you don't let the player's choices matter in the world, then there's a problem. So but, and I think that's where we're getting to that thing about the story is if the player's choices in the world don't matter, if it's always going to be solved the same way, if your puzzles are always going to be solved a certain way, no matter what the players do, then that's a problem. If the princess is going to be kidnapped, whether the players defeat the ambushers or not, if you're in a caravan and the caravan's ambushed and the scenario says the princess gets kidnapped, well, if the players defeat all the attackers, then guess what? The princess shouldn't get kidnapped. So if you, the GM, can come up with some way for the princess to be kidnapped at that point, regardless of what the players do, I think that's screwed up. And that would make me angry. If you say, okay, nope, you defeat them, and then you go on, and then there's another kidnapping attempt later on, and she happens to get kidnapped because the players can't foil it then, I think that's fair game. So
I think heavy-handed roll or railroading is bad, but you know, I kind of go back and forth on this whole thing of railroading and storytelling. But ultimately, if I'm in a game and it's not super heavy-handed, then I'm fine with it as a player. As a GM, I'm not going to do that. As a GM, I'm going to set a scenario up, and then however the players play it out is how it's going to happen, and that's cool. So if the players want to break into their benefactor's home and steal the map to where the treasure is, then the players can do that. I'm not going to make it so oh nope, the map's not there, just so they can't do that. So yeah, I'm a big fan of, and when I set up problems, mind you, there's a difference here because a lot of times you run pre-made scenarios where I don't. But if I have a problem, a lot of times I won't have a solution to that problem. It'll just be, you know, whatever the players come up with. If that works, great. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. If I run a pre-made scenario, I'm still going to be loose enough that if the players do something the scenario didn't anticipate, then if the players do something the module doesn't address, I'm going to let them do that. And if that means I just have to run the rest of the finish the adventure out, just ad hoc and making things up, that's okay. I'm okay doing that. But I'm also as a player, okay playing in a game that the GM's going to run the module as written, provided the GM doesn't do things like, nope, you can't leave the town. Nope, you can't do that. Provided the GM gives players latitude, then it's not that big of a deal. And if there's that discussion ahead of the game that, hey, this is a historical scenario and I'm not going to let history change, that's okay too. The key is to set those expectations up front. And as long as the players and the GM are both on board with those expectations, I think everything's fine. So I don't know if that answers your question at all or not, but if not, I can, do my own episode responding, or I can leave you another series of rambling messages. Anyhow, I'm really enjoying your podcast, and believe it or not, I am learning things, and I'm glad that you're putting it out there. So hang in there. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Thank Jason for all those calls, and hopefully people can respond and give us more feedback on railroading versus storytelling, how you handle it as a GM, how you handle it as a player. Does it bother you? How do you talk to the GM as a player, or or to the players as a GM on setting up what you want to do? And I think maybe that's it. Is communication is very key in certain scenarios, and actually talking to some of my players about what had happened, sort of a sort of debriefing of the events of the previous uh, session of that Iron Kingdoms 5e. I think had the players known ahead of time, or even the player who got kind of upset, he is not upset in a way if he knows ahead of time. So he really has enjoyed scenarios where they started as prisoners and had to make a prison break. So that seems to be okay, but then again, you start with nothing, right? And again, I think depending on the situation, but I don't think he would have been upset, for example, had the dice not rolled their way and they had been captured by the watch or asked by the watch to come in for questioning in the scenario where they were involved in the ambush. And then with some diplomacy and roles and role playing, maybe they could have explained themselves and found out, and the authorities would have found out what happened. But I mean, there should be consequences. I know the story is about the players, but there should be consequences if you have not a scenario, but a world where there is organization and the rule of law, and you break the law, there should be consequences, right? Granted, a lot of fantasy games and and worlds are more harsh. Um, there's a lot of lawlessness, but that does reflect various time periods of our world as well, where there was lawlessness and people did things with impunity until the authorities stepped in, right? If you think about the golden age of piracy, the pirates had a free hand in the Caribbean until the British became fed up with it and stepped in and then took their giant, comparatively giant ships and blew up the smaller sloop type ships that the pirates generally had. So, just as FYI, one of the best examples of why pirates never went up against ships of the line is in the series Black Sails on Stars. It's a fantastic series. It's a prequel, if you don't know, to Treasure Island, where you learn about the history of how they got the treasure, where they put the treasure, and about Captain Flint. It's pretty, as our Stars series or shows. It is pretty risque. I would even say it's a bit more graphic sometimes than Spartacus was, although that was a fantastic series as well. So I recommend Black Sails, but it does show how um, how behind the power curve pirates could be in a ship-to-ship combat, which I think is great. But that was a diversion. Back to the topic at hand. Uh, I'm glad that I, in a way, have free reign if it's part of the story and not too heavy handed in running scenarios. And I do run a lot of pre made scenarios because it's quicker, but depending on the company, a lot of them, like I would say, for example, the Warhammer adventures are, in a way, guidelines and story hooks. And yes, there are things that happen and things that happen in the background that the characters see. A lot of it is world building and to add color to the verse. But the actual plot of the way things go, there's a lot of leeway, and characters, depending on how they react, can go from, can branch in the various ways. And I think even a giant epic mega adventure like Masks of Nyarlathotep, there are different directions you can go on and different ways that the adventure can go. So I guess it depends on how the authors of the adventure build the framework, right? In comparison, there are some early Dark Sun adventures. I think Freedom and The Road to Uruk are examples where the characters are, in a way, just bystanders of the events that happen in the novels that run parallel to the adventures. I mean, there is like a little blurb in the summary that I just read that says that the characters' actions can do something, but they really can't, based on what I've read of the adventure. And that is one of the adventures that the author, you can look it up, is not super proud of. But I guess that's how things were changing in AD&D second edition at the time. It was less dungeon crawls and here's the situation, go, as was established in like the S series or the GDQ series, and instead it was, this is a story that is unfolding, the characters are in the middle of it, right? So it's this different strange kind of concept of game design that evolved over time, at least in AD&D, right? Or many of the adventures were sandbox initially, and then they became mini stories, and things would happen despite the characters, as you pointed out. When things should happen because of the character's actions, right? It should be influenced by the character's actions. Now, if the characters decide to do nothing when given the opportunity, then I think it is in the GM's right, and they are justified, that the NPCs have their own machinations and plots and things that will happen. That's, I think, very interesting. Is I've seen adventures or where they have like an outline of what the villains will do, the antagonists will do, and there are points where the players can intervene, and if they do nothing, well, then the events happen. So hopefully that doesn't count as a railroad in your mind, Jason. And I'd love to discuss this a lot further. I think it's a fun topic. But we'll go on to the next thing now. So I think I'm going to run the recaps together this week. Not a lot of gaming. Sunday was just character creation, another session 0 for a game on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel and podcast run by Kevin Madison. And actually, this is very interesting because I've always been wanted to play or run in this verse. We made characters for the 5e Ravnica, or it's a Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica book. It's a Magic the Gathering world full of planeswalkers and the like. It's a giant world city. And it's a very popular Magic the Gathering card set whenever they re-up them or come out. And it's a setting for 5e, so D&D 5e. And we made characters. And I don't know if I ran recorded a character creation session with Jason Connerly for Twilight 2000. I haven't watched it. I usually don't watch actual play. The only actual play I listen to is stuff from Andy Goodman's catalog, and that is sparingly. But I don't really watch actual plays that I participate in either. Anyway, so we created characters, and I made a beast of a Minotaur barbarian and he's making us start at 5th level. So he is the Path of the Berserker at 5th level. He already gets an extra attack. He can frenzy. And there's some interesting options for Minotaurs too. So Minotaurs also have in the D&D parlance a bonus action to attack with to gore with their horns. They have a charge as well. It's a dash followed by an attack in the 5e parlance. And he is of the Gruul Guild faction, and he's a member of the Burning Tree clan. So I think his background was the most interesting. He's an ex-athlete, probably participated in some sort of decathlon, pentathlon type games that might exist or might not in the Ravnica verse. But he has as part of his trappings a chariot, which is kind of funny. And I took a feat for wrestling. So wrestling was his specialty. And it was the other interesting thing in the character creation, other than this building up a 5e character to 5th level, was some backgrounds. We have some contacts as well. So I think it should be a pretty fun game. We'll see how it goes. My character will have a lot of staying power as a barbarian. When they're raged, they can last a while. So that's pretty cool. So the other game was also D&D 5e this week so far, and it was Legends of the Witchfire, my continuation of our Iron Kingdoms 5e game. And this game went pretty well. The gist of it was that the characters went through the city trying to avoid the undead Risen Thralls' attacks and get to the graveyard where they knew the ritual had originated from, and the attempt was to stop the ritual. So they saw things happening, and they passed most of them up. The only time they stopped, as they avoided Risen Thrall groups, was when they saw some children being trapped under a cart being attacked by thralls. So they stopped and rendered aid, destroying all the creatures, and then they took the kids back to their house. They had gotten separated from their family when the shit hit the fan, and they were rewarded with some stuff, which was kind of nice of them to do that. So maybe that was an incentive to do nice things for players. So they were given a hand cannon with the runes etched on it, saying the final offer or something like that, and some ammunition. So oddly, the character that did not take it was not the gunslinger. So I don't know if that's good or bad. I guess the characters will have to arm wrestle about it to figure it out. So we did get to the graveyard, and there was a pretty brutal encounter. It seems like at least one player drops during these encounters, and they fought some more powerful undead, some more like skeleton warrior types. And one skeleton warrior got a crit and a hit and took down a player in one round. And it took a while for them to take down these more powerful undead. Meanwhile, the more powerful undead were summoning through some arcane, esoteric method, more risen thralls to their aid. So I had the encounter, gave some tension, right? It's a good way to ratchet up tension, much like we see in ICRPG. There's really not a good way to do that. So I kind of borrowed a technique and had like a counter, and then had X number of mobs show up per round. So the players got the gist that they had to finish off as many mobs as they can, and then retreat to the mausoleum, where they did eventually, and they shut the door. So that's where we stopped before they continued down into the underbelly of the graveyard and hopefully get to the root of this thing, this ritual, and save Corvus. So we'll see how things go. It should be pretty cool. I feel like we have about 2 more sessions before we finish this mini campaign, and then we're going to go on to other things. So among the things that have been bandied out are Starfinder. Starfinder has a new adventure path that's called Horizons of the Vast, and it's more or less Kingmaker in space. So Kingmaker is a very famous Pathfinder adventure path, and they've rebuilt, it's in the process of being recreated into Pathfinder 2nd edition for some sort of anniversary release. But I think they have a 5e version and 5e bestiary and things like that. It'd be fun to run Kingmaker again. I didn't quite finish it. We got to book 6, and the characters suffered from an ill case of rocket tag, where the adversary won. So most of the players, I guess, were kind of fed up with it. There was some internal strife as well between some of the players. The interesting thing about Kingmaker is that you do have to pick a king, and there are different factions that formed, where there were some players who were like, well, I would make a better king. No, I would make a better king. And they were taking sides, which is kind of interesting. And I guess that kind of diplomatic PvP ended up breaking the group. I guess a tale for another time. So we bandied about Starfinder Horizons of the Vast to start that. And then we had done a play test for the Dune Quick Start, and a couple of the players really liked it. Some of the people did not. If you participated, you could now comment because the book's out. Because some people that I know who might listen to this podcast participated. And those people liked it, and that's another game that has been thrown out as a suggestion to continue. It uses a Modifius 2D20 system, but it is less granular than Mutant Chronicles or Conan, and more like the Star Trek, more narrative in its approach. All right, well, that's recaps. Thank you for tuning in. My birthday is coming up. My birthday is July 20th. I will be 51 years old. And last year I had fun running a special game on my birthday. It was a Monday night last year, I believe, and I ran a D&D 2nd edition and Alka-Team game. I had a fun time. I didn't get nearly as far as I wanted to. It was more or less almost an intro to a mini campaign, and one of these days maybe I'll get back to it. I don't know. It might be hard to wrangle those players up again. But this year I'm going to run another game, and the game I decided on was Twilight 2000 4th edition. And it looks like so far I have 7 players, 6, maybe 7 players signed up for the game, and I'm getting kind of nervous. It is, as I mentioned, an all-star crew, people from that you might see on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel, and maybe even the Dungeon Muser himself. So some of the regulars who play on Tuesday night have been offered the chance to play, and I definitely, it looks like I have committed and chosen 3 people, have chosen their character already. Sorry, 4 people, although the 4th person, which is my wife, who I asked to play, and she accepted, and that makes me even more nervous because now I have to run for this person who's always going to be there at my side and gives me a lot of input, negative and positive, of how I run games. And we'll see. One of the things I'm nervous about is so she did choose, there were two female character pre-gens, and she did choose one of them. And the first thing she said, if you've heard the previous podcast, is, okay, wow. So this character is not Vasquez, who I assume she would love to play in Aliens, tough, good at guns, tough-minded woman, just like my wife is. But this character is not that. So we'll see how Amy plays her. It should be pretty fun. So a couple other people, like I said, have chosen their character. And I just got to figure out, like, what am I going to do? I think for sure so far, I've thought that I know what the opening scene will be. I have to run it by one of the players, and hopefully they will agree, just so we start with some action. And then I'd like to get into the travel part and then conclude with a location. And we'll see how that goes. So it can highlight the combat of the game as well as the travel aspect and trying to deal with resources. So hopefully I can get that into a 3 to 4 hour session. We will see. And a challenge is also going to be, what makes me a bit nervous is it's a new rule set, and it nominally uses the Mutant Year Zero engine that the Free League publishing games have, but it changes it up. Instead of a pool of D6s, you roll 2 dice, much like you would in Savage Worlds, but unlike Savage Worlds, where you roll the skill dice or an attribute dice and a wild dice, a D6. In this game, you roll your attribute dice plus your attribute. So, and then you still try to hit a 6 or better. However, you're not just limited to having your skill or attribute represented by a D6. It can be represented by a D8, a D10, and a D12. So, and what helps and bolster that, if you might think, oh, well, it's going to be hard for them to succeed on tasks with only 2 dice, there are a lot of talents that will bolster your dice up 1 dice or so. So, for example, there is one character who's a machine gunner who, although has a D10 to roll, when normally using heavy weapons, when they're using a machine gun, they get to roll the D12. So that's a 50% chance on the D6. Plus, you have a push mechanic, which means you can re-roll dice, although if you fail when you push, there could be consequences. And combat is a little tricky because you can have not just your 2 dice, but you can add ammo dice as well, depending on how much you want to saturate the field with bullets from an automatic type weapon. So there are some nuances that I need to review and refresh upon, especially in combat. There are rules for suppression and coolness under fire that I have to review, as well as the travel portion, which will keep track of food, water, ammunition. That's one of the easiest things to keep track of as far as resources go. But vehicles are a big deal and important in this game, and you need to keep track of fuel. So I did roll up a vehicle for the characters, and they do have an APC, which is a pretty nice piece of equipment. And it still will be running on, I think it's diesel or gasoline, and it has not been converted yet since we're starting off. And I also decided, I guess, to start in Poland as the default start location for the setting. They give you an option to start in Sweden along the Swedish-Finnish border, I believe, as well. But I wanted to start in Poland because that's a classic place that you start Twilight 2000. And I had muddled and toyed with the idea of doing like a Lone Star, Red Star type of mini scenario, but one of the players who might participate in a long-term campaign said that they'd rather work towards that, because the whole fascination, I think, with Twilight 2000 is that you do start at the tail end of the Third World War, where things have broken down and shit has really hit the fan, and you just might want to try to get home. And that's a big long-term goal for a lot of players, apparently, in the original game, and I think in this game as well, that still holds true. So what's very nice is that the products that were from the original Twilight 2000, even though they're, say, for example, remaking Black Madonna, which is a classic adventure. They're backwards compatible. They have a conversion document that's like 1 or 2 pages, which is fascinating and fantastic. So you have to muddle through changes. The good thing about the old versions is that they had sort of they had types. It's not types. That's not the word I'm looking for. The word I'm looking for is they had descriptions and tags. Tags is probably a great word to use. They had tags for different levels of competence, and you can easily convert, for example, between novice and elite to the sort of 4 dice method or 4 dice delineation that they have in the new game. So novice would be a D6, right? And elite would be a D12, and you just go from there. So I'm looking forward to that. I probably should review vehicle combat as well. I'm adding to my list of things as I record this and write this down, because there probably will be some vehicle combat. You have an APC with a big old machine gun on the top of it, so I need to know what's going to happen. So I got my work cut out for me. I have several days to work on it. I probably will work on it this weekend diligently. So hopefully if you listen to my podcast and you're playing, you can choose a guy or gal. There's still the mechanic Diaz available as well. So we'll see how things go, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope it'll go well. It might be a little clunky and slow, but then we'll find that out, won't we? And of course, if we don't like the system, we can always default to Savage Worlds, right? Or something else. All right, well, that's my rambling about preparation for the Twilight 2000 game. This is part of my brainstorming and thought process, and I think I have an outline as I'm developing it, and it should be pretty damn fun. It's a neat post-apocalyptic setting, and I really mean to, and I'm very excited about exploring it. Sing me a song, you're a singer. Do me a wrong, you're a bringer of evil. The devil is never a maker. The more that you give, you're a taker. Well, it goes on and on and on. It's heaven and hell. I'm going to stop here with this short outro. I have a game tonight. I'm looking forward to the conclusion of our Barbarians of Lemuria game with Jason Connerly. So that will be in the next episode. I didn't want to wait to put out this episode because I think Jason has some good comments and feedback. So enjoy that. Please respond and counterpoint or agree with him. And I will see you next time.